Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 25th episode on your favorite 3M channel. And tonight is a very special night, not only because we started this journey together 6 months ago, but because I have a special guest tonight. I have Pastor Josh Robinson, who is not only a reverend, but he's also a book author. And we have prepared so many wonderful and exciting things for you tonight. But first, Josh, thank you so much for finding time for all of us tonight, and welcome on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Nick. It's my honor to be here. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, wonderful. Josh, before we start talking about your latest book and all the supernatural stuff that comes with that, can you please share with us something about your theological upbringing, your role as a pastor and a church planter? Anything that you think may be interesting for us to learn about you.
Sure. Yeah. So became a Christian whenever I was about 18 years old. I'm in my mid 30s now. So coming in there, been walking with the Lord for a while now, and pretty early on in my walk, I was just very inquisitive. I had a lot of questions, and at the time, I was a part of a church that really just kind of said, well, just take it all on faith. You know what I mean? And for some people that works, but the way that my mind works, I didn't find that very compelling. And so that really led me on a journey to just walking deeply with the Lord and learning about His Word and all of the things in it. And so it was about 2010 to 2013 or so. I spent some time at Liberty University online from their Liberty's in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I studied biblical and theological studies there. I feel like that what I got while I was there was a toolbox. It was a toolbox to be able to understand the biblical text. It was it was just the toolbox that you would need. Not just as a pastor, but as a layman who wants to understand the things of the Lord. And so, I done that. And, as I was going through that process, I really felt like the Lord was calling me to ministry. And so I kind of began, teaching things like Sunday school. And, I had a season where I done youth ministry. And, eventually that led to preaching on Sundays. And, I told my pastor at the time, I really feel like that the Lord is calling me to something else than just pastoring, a church that's been around for a long time. Like I really feel like the Lord is calling me to something new, something that's not being done here in the coal fields of West Virginia. So that's where I'm from, everybody. I'm from the coal fields of West Virginia, a small town called Madison. We have more people in our city capital of Charleston than we have in our entire county here in Boone County. But I really felt like the Lord was calling me to something new. And at the time I didn't quite know what that was. And within a couple of years, I got plugged in with some people who were doing church planting, and this was whenever, Acts 29 network was really big. And, you had people out there like Mark Driscoll and Matt Chandler and, all of those people planting churches. And, long story short, we ended up planting a church through the Acts 29 network, and that was in 2016. And, the church has been going since late 2016, early 2017. And, whenever we started off, it was really just my family and a core group of people. We had about 7 people, and now, we're at about 100 people on Sundays. Praise God for that. And, but, to kind of lead this into how I kind of got into some of the supernatural stuff, after I got out of Liberty, I'm just a big reader. Like I've always loved to read. I have a smaller library here at my home, and then I've got most of my theological books at my church office. But I have just been a big time reader. And in about Oh, I would say it's about 2017, 2018. I ended up picking up a book by Dr. Michael Heiser called The Unseen Realm. And that book rocked my world. And at the time, I didn't know quite what to think of it. But I did have a toolbox to be able to understand some of it from my training at Liberty University. And so I started picking up some of the other stuff that he wrote, like Angels, and then Demons, and Reversing Hormone, and some of the other things that he's wrote that are some of the smaller books and stuff. And that led me on a journey into understanding the Bible in a deeper way in its ancient Near Eastern context. And that's led me to people like Dr. Tim Mackey from Bible Project. That's led me to, some of those other people out there too. I picked up a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls and, read through those. And, that's where I have really been in the past, 5 years or so, and kind of swimming in those waters. And doing that really it changed the way that I view things, because I began to realize very quickly that the worldview that I have as a modern man from Southern Appalachia is not the same worldview that the biblical authors had, or the people who were from that era. And so I began to really take that seriously. I think that you've got kind of two options at that point. You just kind of write it off as an archaic thing where people just didn't know any better, or you can embrace it and you can say, well, this is how the people who were inspired by God understood the world around them. And that's kind of where it led me. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit about my journey. That's touching a little bit on some of the supernatural stuff. That happened really, getting into that. That's something that I kind of experienced just in the ministry of being a pastor. And some of that's, been put out there in a docuseries called Dark Holler, which is available on YouTube for free. For those who are interested in that. But yeah, so that's kind of just a short version of my journey and how I've got to where I am. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really exciting to see how God picks up someone, like, for example, yourself in this case, and just takes you and filters you through all these events, shapes you, and
Yeah.
then how he uses you in a wonderful way. And this is not just one of those churchy things we hear, like, oh, God has wonderful plan for you, because you know these plans may be wonderful the way you're expecting them, but God may have something completely different, for you. And the way we got connected on Facebook, and the way God led me to start the channel. And then I was thinking, well, what about inviting Pastor Josh? That would be wonderful. And then finally being able not just to see your profile on Facebook and read your amazing, blog posts and Facebook posts, but also getting to actually see you talking, getting engaged in this docu-series, which you mentioned, Dark Caller. And I was like, wow, yeah, Pastor Josh would be a wonderful addition to the channel. So, Pastor Josh, tonight we'll be talking about your latest book, which you can tell us more about it, maybe including the date it will be printed and available for people to buy it online. I have included the Amazon link in this at the end of the description. So your book is called Re-Enchanting the Unseen, with the subtitle Angels, Demons, and Strange Beings from Time and Space. What has led you to write this book?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. So one of the things that I have noticed coming from where I came from, just with the story that we began with, one of the things that I've noticed during my time in pastoral ministry is that, well, a lot of people suffer from the same things that I suffered from. It's that our worldview is very modern, secularist, and it's very nice and clean and sterile. And whenever people experience strange things, or whenever they come to the Bible, because they have that kind of ingrained worldview, they can't make sense of a lot of things. And so with this book, really what I wanted to do was I wanted to write a book that was kind of a guide to help people think about some of these things: angels, demons, and strange beings from time and space, which, that's things like UFOs. Which is a hot button topic right now in our culture, by the way. If you've not heard about the UFO stuff going on, you're probably living under a rock. But not just that, but things like cryptids. Like I live in West Virginia. Our state animal might as well be the Mothman, and so you know, so and things like ghosts, right? Like in West Virginia, we have a lot of quote unquote haunted places. So I just want to help people think about those things, because the thing that I have discovered on my journey, through the Bible and through the ancient Near Eastern literature that surrounds the Bible, is the Bible actually has categories for understanding these things. And that was one of the things that was most shocking to me. Is I'm like, whoa, these people had a way different worldview than I do. And I think familiarizing ourselves with some of this stuff can really help us make sense of the world around us. And so that's really what this book is about. It's about re-enchanting the unseen realm. And another thing that the book is doing too is it's really taking, say, the ideas of Dr. Michael Heiser, but it's also synthesizing them with the thoughts of others throughout church history. Dr. Heiser does a great job of bringing in the, literature from the Second Temple period, from the ancient Near East, and I do some of that in this book as well. But another thing that I really wanted to do was to take that and to synthesize it with some of the great thinkers throughout church history, like Dionysius the Areopagite, or Thomas Aquinas, some of those types of people, and kind of add some rootedness to it that I think that a lot of people probably just wouldn't be aware of. And it's just things that I've come across through my years, through some of my studies. So, but the project is aimed at re-enchanting the unseen realm. I want to give people a re-enchanted vision for the world around them, and for the realm that's here that we can't see. So that's what's going on with it.
Yeah, I think we can agree that this is your overall theme in the book, which I was, because people don't know, you were so gracious to email me the PDF, and I was reading it, and I was like, I had to include in this conversation a couple of quotes from your book because I love them. So let's start tonight's discussion with one of them, and you can just give a comment because I love this. You wrote at the beginning of the book, when we open the pages of the Bible, we find that we live in a world where the seen world and the unseen world overlap and interact with one another. And make no mistake about it, the unseen world isn't just some abstract idea, which reminded me many times when we talk about heaven and hell, we think about something up and down. And when we think about, when we die, we'll go to heaven, we always think about, something that is so abstract and so far. We don't see always this reality of God, angels, demons, territorial beings, fallen Elohim. We don't always see them as something that is present here and now. This is the unseen world, as realistic as our world, and these two worlds just interfere with each other all the time, 24/7. It's not, oh, this is just another dimension. So can you please, give some comment about this quotation, please?
Yeah. And, again, a lot of this is rooted in my experience that for a lot of people, the idea of an unseen world, it's just an abstract idea. It's a lot of what you talk about. Heaven is up, hell is down. Um, and there's not a lot of interaction with those things. Whenever you ask a lot of Christians, do you have a category for angels? A lot of them are like, yeah, sure. I believe that angels exist. And it's like, no, 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 no. I'm asking you more than, do you believe angels exist? Do you believe that angels and other unseen forces are at work in your day-to-day life? Most Christians that I've come across don't have a worldview where that's true. And the problem with that is that whenever we look at the Bible, that is how reality is presented for us. The Apostle Paul talks about at the end of Ephesians that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but the rulers, the authorities, the principalities, dark powers in high places. And, I think that if we understood that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against these powers of spiritual darkness, it would make so much sense of some of the things that are going on in the world for us. And so, that's really what I'm aiming at with that quote, is that for a lot of us, the idea of an unseen realm where there are beings at work 24/7, nonstop, for ages now, like it's a very abstract idea for a lot of people. And it doesn't need to be. And actually what we need to do is begin recovering this enchanted view of reality that the Bible gives to us. So.
Yeah, I also have to compliment the cover of your book. It's done as an 80s kid. I love the page. I mean, people will see it when they go on Amazon. They'll enjoy the book both visually and when it comes to the material. I don't know who did the cover, but it looks like, so much like 80s, like, or like
Bright Night.
yeah, everything that we loved growing up. Well, not just in the 80s, maybe also early or mid the 90s. So I just want to compliment that the book is just amazing from every perspective. Josh,
Thank
when
you.
it comes to your first big chapter in the book, it talks about the angels and the celestial hierarchy. And this is what you said, that traditionally the church has understood there to be three choirs or orders of angels. Then you mentioned the first order. Can you please tell us what beings belong in this first order of angels? And if you can please tell us who they are and something about them.
Yeah, sure. So, traditionally, whenever you look throughout church history, a lot of people attribute an angelic hierarchy to, Dionysius the Areopagite. And, the thing that I have realized is that angelic hierarchies have been around for a really long time. That if you go back to a lot of the work from the Second Temple period, there were Jewish versions of angelic hierarchies too. So, so this is something that's actually very old. It goes back a lot further than just the medieval church. And you really see this idea also in Thomas Aquinas's Summa Theologiae. He has an entire section on the angelic hierarchy there. But traditionally, the way that this has been thought about is in the first choir of angels, there are three celestial beings who make up that choir or that order of angels. And that's the seraphim, the cherubim, and the ophanim, or also, sometimes called thrones. And, these are the angelic beings or the celestial beings, whichever language you prefer, that were thought to be in the closest proximity to God, in what has traditionally been called the Empyrean or the highest heavens. So you'll see this idea in people like Dante. Like if you read Dante's Paradiso, you will see this idea of the Empyrean, the highest heavens. And that's a foreign notion to us today, but throughout church history, this was just the way that they talked about heaven. This is language that they used to just talk about heaven, and I think that we need to be acquainted with that somewhat. And the fact that we're not shows that we've lost some of that rootedness that used to be there. But so what these beings do, and we see them in the Bible. So, for example, the seraphim. We see them, in passages like Isaiah 14:29, Isaiah 30:6, but really in Isaiah 6:2, and that's where Isaiah has this throne vision, right? he sees the Lord exalted and high on a throne, and the train of his robe is filling the heavenly temple there. And he talks about that there are these spiritual beings there called the seraphim, or the serachim in Hebrew. Um, and they're described as fiery flying serpents with 6 wings. And they're there before God in the heavenly temple singing, "Holy, holy, holy to the Lord." So traditionally, those have been put first in, this first choir of angelic hierarchies. And then after that, we see the cherubim, or the cherubim in Hebrew. And we see them in places like Ezekiel 1:5 through 14. They're really described there. And they're described as tetramorphic beings. And what I mean by that is that they have the likeness of men, the likeness of lions, the likeness of oxen, and eagles. Okay, so they're tetramorphic. And the interesting thing is that they're always associated with guarding sacred spaces, right? So we also see them in Genesis 3:24, right? So there in Genesis 3:24, this is after the fall. God exiles the man and the woman, and he sends them east of Eden. And what does he put in front of the gate, the door to Eden, to guard the way back in so that they don't take from the tree of life? Well, it's the cherubim. There are 2 cherubim, and there's a flaming sword there that's turning in every direction. But they're there to guard the way back to this sacred space, this divine council meeting place where God and his heavenly host is. And that theme gets carried on throughout the rest of the scriptures. So, for example, whenever Moses is given the blueprints to the tabernacle, and whenever you see that in its more glorified form of the temple, we see that there are veils separating these sacred spaces, right? Like the holy place from the most holy place. And there on that veil, there's cherubim guarding these sacred spaces. So Eden is like a microcosmic version, the temple is like a microcosmic version of Eden. And the priesthood is like Adam. And actually the interesting thing is, whenever you look into the Hebrew and the description given to the priesthood, they're actually to guard and to keep this microcosmic Eden. That's the same language used of Adam. God put him in the garden to work and to keep it. Well, that can also be translated as to guard and to keep it. So that's what cherubim do. They guard sacred spaces. You see them in Eden, you see them in the tabernacle, you see them in the temple, and you see this in the ancient Near East. Like, every ancient Near Eastern culture has their own versions of this. Like, you look in ancient Egypt, they have the Sphinx. And what do? They guard the sacred spaces of the pyramids, right? You go to Babylon and you see these same types of beings. They've got the heads of Babylonian kings, and they've got the bodies that are very much like the Sphinx. What are they doing? They're guarding the gates of Ishtar. They're guarding these temple spaces, the place where the gods meet. And that's what they're doing in the Bible. They're guarding God's divine council meeting spaces. And then the Ophanim, or the thrones. We see them described in Ezekiel 1:16 through 21. And they're described as having the likeness of barrel wheels, and they're described as being wheels within wheels, with rims full of eyes all around, and they're filled with the Spirit of the living God. And we see there that they kind of function as the wheels on God's throne chariot. So God's throne isn't just a throne, right? It's this throne chariot that's in the heavens, and he rides it, right? He's the cloud rider. And so they're the thrones, or the Ophanim. They're the wheels on that throne. So here in this scene, in the first choir, we have an idea of these spiritual beings, and we see what they're doing. They're praising the Lord in the Imperium, in the heavenly temple. They're guarding that space to make sure that it's not desecrated. And then we have others that are, participating in, his throne chariot. They're the ones who make the movements across the heavens. So that's really what's going on with this first choir. And, that's the picture that Scripture gives us.
Yeah, I think that definitely from these 3 groups, I think that the thrones are the weirdest ones, at
Yes.
least for us, because the images I've been seeing online all these years, I mean, which are of course just the expression of Christian artists. But these creatures seem the weirdest from all these groups. But Josh, before we go to the next order of beings, is it safe to conclude that Satan is not a fallen angel, but actually the fallen seraphim or seraph,
I
because that will be singular?
Yes, I do believe that he is. There could be some evidence that he could be a cherub, but that's also debated too. I think that comes from Ezekiel 28. I think that's the text. I could be wrong about that, but there's some debate on what exactly that passage is talking about, or who the being in sight, in kind of in the forefront is there. But I think that it is safe to conclude that Satan is a fallen seraph. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Like the curse that God pronounces on the serpent. Like, okay, so I think that taking that view, I think that it answers several questions. It's like, number one, why is Satan in the garden? That's one of the first questions that people always ask. Well, if the Garden of Eden is a divine council meeting spot, and it is, it makes sense why he's there. It makes sense why the cherubs are there. This is a sacred space. The seraphs are there praising the Lord. The cherubs are there guarding the sacred space. Now, we don't have any mention of Ophanim or thrones there, but it's safe to assume that they're probably present as well. So that's why Satan is in the garden. This is a divine council meeting space, and it's a microcosmic version of the Imperium. It's just an on-earth version of what's going on in heaven. And it also makes sense of the curse. Like, a lot of people always ask, like, okay, why is this serpent talking? Well, he's a spiritual being. And why does God cast this serpent down? Don't snakes crawl on their bellies anyway? Well, seraphs have 6 wings, right? They have 6 wings. So the curse that he will crawl on its belly, that authority that he was given to be in the presence of God, to be in his heavenly council, he's cast down from that now. He is now cursed to crawl on his belly and to eat dust the rest of his days. So I think that it is safe to conclude that Satan is a seraph in Hebrew. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that gives a lot of explanatory power to what's going on with him.
Just from listening to you from like in the last 10 minutes, I can almost, well, I will not guess, but I just want to ask you, are you a fan of Dr. John Moulton and his work? Because what you explained from the Eden and, how Adam and Eve were seen, it sounds like, some of his material.
Yeah, I am a fan of Dr. Walton. I have read some of his material. I've read, The Lost World of Genesis, some of those, the first 2 books of that. And I've looked at some of the other things that he's done here and there. He wrote a book on the ancient Near East. I can't remember exactly the title of it, but I have read some of that as well. And he did have a commentary on the first 5 books of the Bible, I think. It was like a very brief commentary that I have in my collection, and I have read some of him through that too. But yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, I think we can go to the second level or order of angels. Who are they? Can you please mention those 3, order of beings? And if you can please, again, just describe their function. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. So this is the group that is quote unquote a little more speculative. And what I mean by that is whenever you get into conversations on the celestial hierarchy, this is the group of spiritual beings that you got people like, well, I don't really know if the Bible teaches about these beings. But what I have found in the research that I have put in for this book is they're certainly there. And so those beings are the dominions, or the kurios in Greek, and that's also it's the dominions, and then it's also the powers, or the dunamis in Greek, and then sometimes they're called the virtues. So, for example, if you go to, say, Thomas Aquinas, he calls them the virtues, and that's coming from Dionysius the Areopagite, and that's because Jerome whenever he translated the Greek New Testament into Latin with his Latin Vulgate, he translated dunamis in Greek to virtutum in Latin. So that's where virtues come from. So that's why we end up with the name virtues in the angelic hierarchy. I prefer to call them powers because that's what's in the Greek New Testament. And then after that, we have the authorities, and that's the exousia in Greek. So to kind of get into what they do, so this group of spiritual beings is in, they're not in as close proximity to God as the first group of spiritual beings. So the first group, they're in the highest heaven, they're in the empyrean. These beings seem to be at work in the cosmos. And so, I kind of lay out this distinction, which I think is original to me and to my work, where I call the first beings imperial beings, meaning they're beings who are in the empyrean. And then I call these the celestials or the celestial beings. And that's to get at the realm distinction here, and that's how the hierarchy works. Like, so for example, Francis Turretin, he was one of the big time Reformed writers who come out of the Protestant Reformation. He was a disciple of John Calvin. In his Institutes, he actually rejected the angelic hierarchy because he couldn't find in Scripture that there were any ranks assigned to these beings. He said, he was fine with having a conceptual distinction between these beings, but he wasn't comfortable with rank. And that's the argument you're going to get from a lot of people in the Reformed camp is that. I think the problem with that is, and I've thought about this for a while, that's not how the Bible is laying out this hierarchy. It's laid out in light of cosmology. It's laid out in light of cosmology. So you have the highest heavens, you have the middle heavens, and then you have the earth beneath. And then even in the earth beneath, you have a micro version of that too. You have the heavens above, you have the earth beneath, and then you have the waters beneath the earth. Like it's a mirror of that bigger, grander cosmology. And that gets into the whole topic of the seven heavens and all of that. But anyway, these beings, what they do, a lot of it's in their names. A lot of it's in their names. And one of the reasons why I think that this isn't familiar to us is I don't think we have a very good grasp on how to read our Bibles anymore and how to do just very basic things like word studies. Like, what does this word mean in Greek? You know what I mean? Like, I think that a lot of people, they just don't have that toolbox, and that's not their fault. But it's our responsibility to give them those tools for those of us who have those tools. So the authorities, the dominions, for example, in Greek, their name is kurios. And basically what that means is they're given rulership or lordship. Kurios is the same word as Lord in Greek. So they're thought to be the ones who kind of rule over this hierarchy. So they're kind of like, you can kind of think of them as like the leader of this hierarchy. They're the ones who make sure that everything in the cosmos goes the way that it ought to go. And their name denotes that. They're the dominions. They're the ones who have dominion. They're the ones who have rulership. They are the lords of the celestials here. And the Apostle Paul talks about them. They're mentioned by the Apostle Paul. Now, the ones that he's speaking of here, he's talking about fallen dominions. But if there's fallen dominions, then it also means that there are unfallen dominions as well. So, Colossians 1:16 through 17, the Apostle Paul, he's stating the preeminence of Jesus, right? His death, his burial, his resurrection for the forgiveness of sins, his ascension, and his enthronement at the right hand of God the Father. He says this, because all things in the heavens and on earth were created by him, things visible and things invisible, whether thrones, okay, or dominions, or rulers, or powers, all things were created through him and for him, and he himself is above all things, and in him all things are held together. Now, Paul also mentions the dominions again in Ephesians 1:21. So here's what he says there. I'm going to read 1:15 through 23 to kind of give you some context. But again, it's this idea of Jesus's death, burial, resurrection, ascension, enthronement as King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He says, because of this, I also, hearing of your faith in the Lord Jesus and the love for all of the saints, do not cease giving thanks for you, making mention in my prayers that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him, the eyes of your hearts having been enlightened, so that you may know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance among the saints, and what is the surpassing greatness of his power towards us who believe, according to the workings of his mighty strength, which he has worked in Christ, raising him from the dead, seating him at the right hand in heavenly places. That's key, in heavenly places, above all principality and authority and power and dominion, and every name named, not only in this age, but also in the age to come. He subjected all things under his feet and gave him as head over all things, the church, which is his body, the fullness of the one who fills all things in every way. So here we have the Apostle Paul linking a whole host of spiritual beings to heavenly places. And, commenting on this, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, DDD for short, very, very hard to find. It's out of print, and it's very expensive, but a very scholarly dictionary of deities and demons. Michael Heiser used to recommend this all the time. It's kind of a standard, it's a standard one for this kind of thing. It says this. It says in Ephesians 1:21, Kyrios is part of an enumeration of supernatural powers. The author says that God has raised Jesus Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion and every name that is named. It also mentions principalities, which is arche in Greek, authorities and powers, which is dunamis. Colossians 1:16 states that in Jesus Christ, all things in heaven and earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, or rulers or powers. In both instances, the conviction is clearly stated that all angelic and demonic powers are completely subordinated to Christ, being his own creatures. They are his servants and hence no longer a threat to be feared by God's children. So it's clear in both Ephesians and Colossians that Paul has spiritual powers in mind, not just earthly powers. And so this is the explicit mention of dominions in the Bible. And, I've got quite a bit of more information on that, but, I'll save that. They can get to that and pick up the book and get to that. So let's talk about the virtues or the powers. Okay. So this is one that's fascinating to me. So whenever you look throughout the medieval church, especially in Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, the virtues or the powers are the beings that are they're associated with the elements: earth, fire, wind, water, ether. So they're kind of over the elements, but they're also associated with miracles. And so, it's kind of the things of nature. They're very associated with nature and super nature with miracles. Now, so Paul makes reference to them as well in Ephesians 1:21. And that's a passage that we just now looked at, right? Paul says that in Ephesians 1:21, let me go back here and pull it up. He says that, here it is, that Christ has been seated at the right hand of God the Father in heavenly places above all principality and authority and power. That is dunamis in Greek. So that's where, power, dynamite, you've probably heard that entire thing. But here's the interesting thing. Commenting on this, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons notes that the term powers has a very broad lexical use. So it informs us. It says this. It says, in most biblical instances, however, power is regarded as an attribute either of God, who is in control of all the powers, or of a subservient divine agent acting on his behalf through delegated power. In the biblical and post-biblical literature, these powers include angels, demons, stars, stoicheia, Now that's interesting. We're going to spend some time on that. And the Holy Spirit. Okay, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term stoicheia. I'm sure that you are. But for those who aren't familiar with the term stoicheia, if you've ever heard of the term from the New Testament, elemental spirits, this is where elemental spirits comes from. So Paul uses the word stoicheia in several different places in Galatians 4:3 through 9 and Colossians 2:8 through 20. Now, the interesting thing to note about this is that the word is translated in different ways in most English Bibles. So, for example, if you look at the LEB, which is the Lexham English Bible, it's elemental spirits. If you look at the ESV, it's elementary principles. If you look at the NASB, it's elemental things. If you look at the NKJ or the KJV and the NKJV, it's the elements. Okay, so that should tip you off right now that if every translation translates this differently, there's something going on there that you should pay attention to. But what we find, especially when you look at the context of Galatians and especially Colossians, Colossians is a letter dealt with angel worship. It's all over Colossians. Okay, but so here's what's going on with it. The inspired writers of Scripture, in their context in the ancient world, understood elemental spirits or stoicheia to be the powers at work in the elements of creation, like earth, wind, fire, water, and the rest of the cosmos. Okay. So the Lexham Bible Dictionary, another dictionary that's out there, it's put out by Lexham Press, it affirms this understanding of elemental spirits. And here's what it says. In Colossians 2:8 and 20, where Paul uses stoicheia in a discussion of Christ's lordship over the cosmic powers, and the Colossians worship of angels, which is found in Colossians 2:18, the term likely refers to elemental spirits or elemental spiritual forces, as the NIV puts it, rather than elementary principles, as the NASB says, or basic principles, as the New King James, and rudiments, as the King James says. In Galatians 4:3 through 9, elementary principles and elemental things, or simply elements, they can fit the context of the letter. It says, however, the idea of enslavement in Galatians 4:3 and elaborated in Galatians 4:8 with reference to false gods supports a translation of elemental spirits or elemental spiritual forces, especially in light of the possible influence of Jewish apocalyptic literature and the prevalent belief that nature was controlled by spirit beings. So basically, what's going on here is these are beings that were thought to, you had to appease these beings, right? Because if you didn't, they would bring on things like natural disasters, floods, terrible things like that, blight on your crops, that kind of thing. And so in the ancient world, what would happen was they would make sacrifices to these powers, or, and that was a way to appease them, to make sure that the natural order was kind of preserved. Okay. So basically what he's arguing against the fallen version of these in Galatians and, specifically Colossians. No, I don't think that's necessarily what's going on in Galatians. But anyway, so that's what's going on there. These are the beings that they're stoicheia. They're the powers. They're the ones who are over. They are the powers in the cosmos. They're the ones that work in the powers of creation over the elements. And they're the ones who are working God's supernatural, miraculous things in the creation. So and you kind of see that in Galatians too. And I don't want to go fully into that, but you see that in Galatians. Like, God gives the law to Moses, and then there's this whole thing there, right? Like of lightning and thunder and this cloud and all that. Well, Paul talks about that in Galatians, and he talks about that those are the elemental spirits, and he calls them angels. So there you go. So that's what I think is going on in Galatians. I don't think he's talking about fallen versions of those in Galatians. I think he's talking about the ones that are on the right side of the battle here. Okay, so that's the virtues or the powers. Okay, and the next ones are the authorities, and that's exousia in Greek. And Jerome in his Latin Vulgate, he translates that as potestatum in Latin. He calls them the powers in his hierarchy, but I think that I'm just going to call them the authorities because that's what exousia means in Greek, and to kind of avoid confusion. But basically, the role that these spiritual beings play is exactly what their names imply. They are the ones who have permission from Yahweh to have authority. But authority over what? Well, traditionally, it was understood that they were the ones who had authority over evil spirits in the cosmos. So, commenting on this, Thomas Aquinas, just so you see that this is not just my idea. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologiae, here's what he says. He says, Dionysius explains the names of the orders accordingly as they befit the spiritual perfections that they signify. Gregory, on the other hand, in expounding these names, seems to regard more the exterior ministrations. For he says the angels are so called as announcing the least things, the archangels in the greatest, by the virtues the miraculous are wrought, and by the authorities, hostile powers are repulsed. So that's what they're doing. They are repulsing the evil powers at work here in the cosmos. So you've got basically what you've got here is it's very similar to the first hierarchy. You've got beings who are kind of overseeing this thing, the ones that are at work in it, and then the ones that are making sure that this space is kind of guarded and that it's protected, and they're repulsing evil spirits. So that's the second hierarchy of spiritual beings.
I really enjoyed. I love all this information because a lot of these things, like, just like we chatted before we went live, a lot of these things come from very vague topics. They can be on the fringe. People, including scholars and clergy, they can be very they can be overguarded when it comes to these things because it's so much of the unknown that we don't understand, and which is okay, because if God wanted us to know more in this lifetime, he would have told us. But I appreciate all this information because all these things are helping us understand not just how the cosmos is structured, but also when it comes to the spiritual warfare. I just wanted to comment when you mentioned Colossians 2 and Stoicheia. When I was a freshman at the Moody Bible Institute, I had this class studying and teaching the Bible. And once we had to write a commentary on Colossians 2, which mentions, worshiping the angels. And then I had to check so many Bible commentaries and write a very detailed paper on this. And then in my research, even back then, I noticed how much Paul mentions similar stuff both in Colossians and Ephesians. And back then I understood how these two epistles, they're so much connected that they I think the message, whatever Paul is, different messages Paul is trying to talk about in these two epistles, they're understood the best when we read these two epistles together and when we combine them, and then we get more information. But before we go to the third level, I have a question from Joshua Davidson in
Sure.
our YouTube live. His question is, he says, can Josh define what a spiritual being is? What exactly are we talking about? And I know him. He's one of the people who are helping with the channel. He's a super intelligent guy. I don't think he's just asking a basic question like, oh, spiritual beings, they're, anti-material, beings. He's asking for something more deeper. So can you define what a spiritual being is? What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah. So basically what I would define a spiritual being is something that is and it's probably going to be the answer that he's not looking for, but I think that that's the most basic answer to the question. I think that a spiritual being is simply that. It's something that is by nature, it is a spirit. It is disembodied. Now that doesn't mean now we know from the Bible that these disembodied spirits can take on embodiment and can be embodied through ritual, through possession, through those types of things. But that's what I would call is that they are primarily a spirit in some ways, is what I would say. But I'm sure that he's looking for a much deeper answer than that. But that's probably where I'm just gonna. that's just where I'm at on it. I think that it's just a very simple. But if he's wanting more, I would just ask him to expand on that somewhat, and I would love to answer it.
Or maybe I can also connect you guys on Facebook so you can be friends. He's an amazing guy,
Perfect.
very bright, very artistic and visual, way more than me. And he's leading a few of his own podcasts. Very bright guy. Okay, Josh, when it comes to the third level or order of angels, can you please mention those three and also give us some details about them, please?
Yes. Okay. So this is the third choir of the angelic hierarchy, and this is the one that is thought to be the lowest of all of the choirs. And again, that's not necessarily because they're not as important, they're lower in rank, or aren't as powerful, but because they have different God ordained roles. They are in the furthest proximity from God. They are what I would call the terrestrial beings. And that doesn't mean that they're humans. That just means that they are the ones who occupy human space. It seems the most whenever we look at the Bible. And so these are the principalities, these are the archangels, these are the angels. And so let's kind of get into it. So principalities, they are the first spiritual being in the choir of this third choir of angels. And in Greek, they are the arche. And basically what arche means, it means governor, it means magistrate, it means ruler. And you see that used that way in Luke 12:11. Now, whenever we look at arche, it belongs to the same semantic subdomain as archon. And, I don't know if people are familiar with archon. That's used in a lot of post-biblical literature, even, Gnostic literature, that kind of thing. But it's related to this topic. But whenever we look at the scriptures, we see that these spiritual beings are closely related with rulership of geographical areas, right? The idea of rulership over geographical areas where men reside, where nations are at. And so they're very closely tied with the idea of territorial spirits. So one of the places where we see this spelled out explicitly in the Bible is in Daniel 10:18-21. There, the prophet Daniel has an encounter with a spiritual being, and we'll just go ahead and read the text. It says this. Again, he touched me, the one in the form of a human, and he strengthened me. And he said, "You must not fear, O beloved man. Peace be to you. Be strong and be courageous." And when he spoke with me, I was strengthened, and I said, "Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me." And then he asked, "Do you know why I have come to you? I now return to fight against the prince of Persia. And I myself am going. And look, the prince of Javan." Now, if people are unfamiliar with Javan, go back to the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. Javan is what would later on become Greece. So some translations actually render Javan as Greece. But it says, "The prince of Javan or Greece will come. However, I tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth, that there is not one who contend with me against these beings, except Michael, your prince." So here we learn that there were particular angelic beings in charge of nations, particularly Persia and Greece or Javan, and even Israel here in this text. Now, the term prince, because it's the prince of Persia, the prince of Javan, and the prince of Israel, the term prince is related to the term principality or arche in Greek. A principality, for those who don't know, is a nation state that's ruled over by a prince. Now, for us living in America, that's a very foreign idea to us. But in our American kind of modern context, you can kind of think about it as being similar as a municipality, right? So a municipality is ruled over by municipal officers, right? Like that's going to be, your mayor and, all of those types of people. Like it's very similar. Like we still have similar language, but, that's what a principality is. It's a nation state ruled over by a prince. And this is what these places were. This is what Greece and Persia and all these places were. Now, this thought's also present in, the Second Temple period as well, especially in the Enochian literature. So First Enoch 61:10 says this: he will summon all the host of heaven. So, Enoch's talking about God gathering his host, the divine council. He will summon the host of heavens and all the holy ones above, and the host of God, the cherubic, the seraphim, and Ophanan, and all the angels of power. So we're seeing all kinds of beings named from that angelic hierarchy here, and all of the angels of principalities, and the elect one, and the other powers on the earth and over the water. So beings here associated with the elements, but not just that, but the angels of principality, the ones who are over the nations, right? So it's not just in the Bible; it's also in the Second Temple literature surrounding the Bible as well. It's also in First Enoch chapter 6 as well. And that's the narrative of the fallen angels lusting after the daughters of men, the angels who create the giants. They're called chiefs. Okay, and it's the same thing. So if you look at that narrative, it talks about the chiefs being there. And so commenting on that, the DDD says this in First Enoch 6:8, which is preserved in Greek and Aramaic, in addition to Ethiopian. Arche is used of 20 named angels or watchers, each of whom commands 10 angels of lesser status. This angelic organization appears to have a military origin. For the Israelite army was arranged under leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. See Exodus 18:21, 25, Deuteronomy 1:15, 1 Maccabees 3:55, and the Dead Sea Scrolls 1 QM 3:16 through 17. Josephus refers to the organization of the Maccabean army in 1 Maccabees 3:55 as the old traditional manner. So you can find that in Antiquities 12.301. In the LXX, the Septuagint, Exodus 18:21 through 25 and 1 Maccabees 3:55 uses the term deca-arche, and it's used for commanders of the lowest level of military organization, which was common in the Hellenistic world. So you can see that in Xenophon and Polybus and Josephus and several other people. But basically what it's getting at here is this was a way that militaries were structured back in the ancient day. It's in the Israelites' history. It's in the Greek world. And, so that's what's going on here with this. These principalities are rulers over geographical regions. And, so that's what they do. So, now I won't spend as much time on these. These are the ones that we're more familiar with, especially if I ask you about angels. These are the ones that everybody typically knows. So archangels, they're the second spiritual being in the choir of angels. And it's interesting. They're called the archangels. So you've kind of got the arche from the principalities, and then the angelos from the angels. So it's like they're in between. And Aquinas speaks to that, which we'll get to in a minute. But in Greek, they're the archangelos. And, there's two archangels mentioned in the Bible. Those are Michael and Gabriel. Most are familiar with Michael. Gabriel's one that's a little less familiar. He appears in the book of Daniel 8:16 and 9:21. And whenever we look at scripture, that these are the angels that have been tasked with keeping watch over God's people. So there's the arche part. And they're also acting as announcing important messages to humanity, right? And that's what angels do. That's what malach in Hebrew means. That's what angelos in Greek means. They are messengers. So they have the prince part, the arche part, the arch part, and then they have the angelos part. So they are like divine messengers who are also princes over God's people, protect God's people is kind of what you can think of. And so Aquinas in Summa Theologiae, he says it this way. The archangels, according to Dionysius, are between the principalities and the angels. A medium compared to one extreme seems to be like the other, as participating in the nature of both extremes. Thus, tepid seems cold compared to hot, and hot compared to cold. So the archangels are called the angel princes. For as much as they are princes as regard to angels, and angels in regards to the principalities. But according to Gregory, they are called archangels because they preside over one order of the angels, as it were, announcing greater things. So, Aquinas is kind of getting at that there. He's using an analogy of tepid and hot and cold, and he's, how this kind of participates in both extremes. And, that's what he's drawing that analogy to say that this is what the archangels do. They're participating in the arche part and the messenger part. So that's what's going on with that. So that's what archangels do. And that's what their role in there. And then angels, obviously, that's malach in Hebrew, that's angelos in Greek. And they're the messengers. They're the ones who proclaim news from heaven to humanity, right? We see that all throughout the scriptures. They're the ones who seem to be in the closest proximity to humans. And so that's the heavenly hierarchy.
Well, are you saying we're done? I'm just kidding.
No, we've got a lot more.
No, I'm just messing up. I know that many believers will be upset with this question and conclusion, which I'm anticipating for you to agree with or not. But are we safe to conclude and agree with Dr. Michael Heiser that actually angels have no wings, and that this is basically Hollywood imagination and just coming from the stories we tell to our kids?
Yeah, I think that it's safe to conclude that. I mean, whenever we look at the Bible, whenever we look at the malach or the angelos in the Old Testament and the New Testament, there doesn't seem to be any descriptions of them having wings. I think that a lot of what's going on is they are taking, descriptions of the seraphim and probably imposing it upon the angelos. And, that's, I get it. You could make the case that all of these are types of angels. I think that Heiser has a bit different view of that, but I think that it is safe to say that the angels, that's kind of a Hollywood kind of deal. They don't seem to have the wings that we see in Hollywood.
Yeah, thank you for that. Josh, we're coming to the next part of the next section of your book, which we can call the powers of darkness. Now, here as well, you have come up with 3 levels, and I don't think we need another 1 hour to explain all of this, because these these levels of beings and their function seem to portray or copy or mirror what you mentioned about angels, but in a bad way. So can you please give us either your summary or whatever you think it's important, that or any differences compared to the angelic order?
Yeah, well, I would just say that the fallen hierarchy there, it's a corruption of the real deal. You can kind of think of it as everything that the others do, submitted to God, these do in rebellion. So they're desecrated. Like if some guard sacred space, some guard desecrated space. If some are present in, I'm just going to pick one from each of the hierarchy. If one is involved in the miraculous, then the other is involved in things like natural disasters. If one is tasked with bringing messages from heaven to men, then the other is bringing false messages to people. And I think that that's what we see in cults, like LDS stuff and other world religions and those types of things. So kind of bring some practicalness to how to think about that. So
yeah, this is, before I say something, I just want to mention, I just want to give explanation for anyone who is watching this and who is not a Christian. What I'm about to say does not come from some elitistic point of view where I think everyone else is wrong about everything and my religion is the best. No, but I just want to say, when you mentioned Mormons, it just reminds me of how Islam started, because both of these movements started in a very similar way, but these supposed angels, and we know what Paul says, how even Satan comes camouflaged as the angel of light, and of course he's not. And in both of these movements, both of these religions, we see the beginning of these movements, and we see how these messengers have deceived people. And while there are some similarities with how people, I mean, how God used his messengers or the angels to talk to people, we see also a different level, a different structure of how he communicates with people. And he would always back it up with his presence, with his powers, with his miracles, which we do not always see in all these different religions. So it just came to my mind because you mentioned LDS. That's what I just wanted to add on that. Okay, so the next section could be maybe a little bit more interesting to our viewers, where you talk about demons and or evil or unclean spirits. You mentioned the fallen sons of God and some other demonic entities. I would just say you can take 5 minutes, you can take 20 minutes, it doesn't matter. What do you think is important for our audience that you want to talk about, these two orders?
Yeah. So, I would say that I think that a lot of Christians think that demons are the high guys on the pecking order. And I think that whenever we look at the Bible, they are different than the fallen angels, is what I would say. They're of a different nature, is what I would say. They have a different origin, is what I would say. And so I think that the Bible teaches us, and I think that it's very clear in the literature of the Second Temple period, and in parallel stories from the ancient Near East, that these beings are well, let's just use the language the Bible uses. They are the product of the sons of God coming down into the daughters of men and taking them to be wives. And they are connected with the giants, with the Nephilim. Also, names that they have ascribed to them as the Nephilim, the Anakim, and then the Rephaim, as the Hebrew Bible kind of goes along. They are from the departed. They are the disembodied spirits of the departed giants, is basically what they are. And I know we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about here, so I won't spend a ton of time on this because we've got a lot to cover. But that's used. That's seen all throughout the the Second Temple period. One of the things that I will talk about here, just kind of briefly, is just so you can kind of take this thread and kind of trace it. I will talk about the Rephaim. So the term Rephaim is used 25 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's found in Deuteronomy 2, 9 through 11. There we encounter a narrative about the Israelites' journey through the desert. At that time, the Lord instructs Moses to not antagonize the Moabites. And so the text says this: the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab, nor provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession, because I have given Air to the sons of Lot as a possession. The Emim lived there formerly as a people of great and numerous, as tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also regarded as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. So here in this passage and in others, the Rephaim, or the Emim, as they're called by the Moabites, were as great and as tall as the Anakim. And so, whenever we look at Scripture and the story of Scripture, we see all kinds of stories there. One of them in particular. Oh, my dogs are barking. I don't know if you can hear them in the background here. I think somebody's about to come through my door here. It's probably my wife. But anyway, whenever we look at Scripture, we see, for example, like the stories of Og of Bashan, right? In Deuteronomy 1 through 11, he's described as this giant warrior king. And, it talks about him having this bed of, that's this huge bed, right? It says that he has a bedstead of iron, and it's 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in its width, according to the cubit of a man. And so the Rephaim are connected to the giants. Now, another interesting thing about the Rephaim is the linguistic use, the the way that it's used in other places. So whenever we see the term Rephaim used in other places, especially like okay, we'll look at ancient Ugarit. The Rephaim are depicted as dead warrior kings who inhabit the underworld. Okay, this also has a connection point with the Bible. So whenever the Bible speaks of the Rephaim, it speaks of them not only as giants, but as dead warrior kings who inhabit the underworld. And so some of the language that's used to describe them in the Bible are stuff like the dead, departed spirits, or the shades. So, for example, David in Psalm 88, 9 through 13 says, "My eyes languish for misery. I call on you, O Yahweh. Every day I spread out my hands to you. Do you work wonders for the dead? Or do the departed spirits, Rephaim, rise up to praise you? Selah, is your loyal love told in the grave, or your faithfulness in the underworld?" So the departed spirits, the Rephaim, are associated and they're put in parallel with the underworld. Now, there's some more too, like Isaiah. So Isaiah uses Rephaim in Isaiah 14:9 and 26:14. And so he states this: "Sheol below is getting excited over you to meet you. When you come, it arouses the dead spirits," or the Rephaim, "for you. All of the leaders of the earth. It raises all of the kings of the nations from their thrones." So here, Rephaim is put in parallel with dead spirits of kings in the underworld. So it's used that way in ancient Ugarit, and it's also used this way in the Bible as well. So to kind of just build up a portrait of meaning here, we have Rephaim being a synonym for Anakim, and Anakim being, a synonym for Nephilim. And it's not only a synonym for that, but it's also used to describe the shades or the departed spirits of warrior kings from the nations who reside in the underworld. So this is the idea. This is basically where the idea of unclean spirit comes from in the New Testament. It is a spirit that is unclean. Why is it unclean? Well, it's not unclean because it forgot to take a shower. It's unclean. It's unclean because it comes from a unholy union between spiritual beings and human daughters, the daughters of men. It's a forbidden union. And Jude talks about their angels coming from leaving their proper habitation to seek after strange flesh. And he compares it, he uses it in parallel with Sodom and Gomorrah, like that kind of sexual licentiousness. So that's why it's unclean. That's why they're the unclean spirits. The spirits of the giants, and the giants are the products of unclean unions. So that's demons. That's a very short overview of that chapter. If you want more, you can check out the book and get some of that there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know if you want to say anything about Lilith and Azazel or Azazel. There are different ways you can pronounce this being. We talked about Lilith a couple of times on my show, including recent video when we analyzed Diablo 4, a very current famous RPG game. But also, I know you mentioned Lilith in the Dark Holler when just at the end of that docu-series you talk about it. So do you want to say something short about these two demonic entities?
Yeah, just very quickly, I list them under the category of other demonic entities, just because they're explicitly named in the Bible. So, Azazel or Azazel, however you prefer to pronounce it, you find him in Leviticus 16 and the Day of Atonement ritual. Whenever the priests cast lots, there's the one goat that is offered up as a sacrifice to make purification for the people and for the holy place of the temple for the year. And then whenever the lot falls on the other goat, it's the scapegoat, and it's sent out into the wilderness, which is the place that's outside of the sacred space of Israel. It's the place of sin. It's the wilderness, right? It's the place associated with Israel's sin as they're coming through the wilderness into the promised land. So there's all kinds of connotations of sin being related with wilderness. but the lot falls on the scapegoat, and it says that it's a goat for Azazel. Now, why? A lot of people try to make, especially those and I would say critical circles, try to use this as, oh, this is an evidence of Israelite polytheism. They're sacrificing to other gods, but actually what's going on with it, and Dr. Heiser talks about this a ton in his work, it's actually sending out sin. The sin is imparted through a hand press on the head of the scapegoat, and it's sent out to the place of sin. It's sent out to where sin resides outside of the camp, so that this place can remain a sacred space, a holy space, and so that God can reside in our proximity. So that's Azazel. And Lilith is explicitly mentioned in the Bible too. She's also mentioned in other ancient Near Eastern texts coming from Mesopotamia. But Lilith is she's described in various ways. She's called Lilith, Lilatu, and Lilith. And so she is a demonic. She's female. She's described as being female, but she is a figure associated with the night and with darkness. An ancient Jewish tradition attributed demonic qualities to her. Lilith is explicitly found in Isaiah 34:14, and I'm pretty sure that this is talking about some of the places in Assyria. It talks about the desert creatures will meet with the wolves. The hairy goat will also cry to its kind. And yes, the night monster, Lilith, will settle there and will find herself a resting place. Now, some translations say the night owl. Some say the night monster. This is one of those places, whenever you look at Bible translations, they translate it in all kinds of ways. And that should always cause you to pause and ask why that is. So she's associated with owl symbolism. And owls are like these night creatures that fly in the skies, right? And they're like guardians of secret dark knowledge. They're used that way all the time, and so that's Lilith. She's also associated with things like sudden infant death syndrome, like in the ancient world when infants would die, in their sleep. They would attribute that to this demonic entity named Lilith. Or Lilith or Lilatu. So, that's just a couple that are explicitly mentioned in the Bible, Azazel and Lilith. And so I figured it was worth a mention.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think maybe in this section, some other creatures could be mentioned, like satyrs, like another goat type, desert creatures, and sort of that. But I would all encourage you to support Pastor Josh and his book so you can learn more. Okay, Josh, we have two more sections. This one is also very interesting, but from another level. And this is a section I spoke with Dr. Hugh Ross a few weeks ago. We spent a long time talking about UFOs, but you don't mention just UFOs. You mentioned also something UAPs, which are unidentified aerial phenomena. So can we please start by explaining the difference between these two?
Yeah, unidentified aerial phenomena can be something other than craft. So unidentified aerial phenomena can just simply be lights in the sky. Flying objects is something it's a term that's used more for something like a craft that's unidentified. Unidentified aerial phenomena can be that, but it's also something that's actually a lot broader than that. So it can be lights in the sky, it can be orbs of light. There's a lot of that kind of thing described, for example, in the Mothman Prophecies that John Keel wrote, where he talks about there would be big orbs of light the size of, volleyballs flying over the river near Point Pleasant. That would be categorized as unidentified aerial phenomenon, because it's not necessarily a flying object. It's not a craft, but it's something that's flying. It's just unidentified. It's some sort of aerial phenomenon that we don't know what it is. So.
Yeah, since you mentioned John Keel, and I plan to actually read more some of his stuff, and I plan to rewatch Mothman's Prophecies with Richard Gere from a couple of decades ago. Now, when I've been studying more of these things, I want to read the movie. I want to watch the movie again. I just want to mention two of John Keel's quotations. They're short, which you mentioned in your book, because I think they're so important for our discussion. Even though he's, as much as we know, he's not a born again man of God, but his research shows this. First thing he says, in essence, historical encounters with so-called lights in the sky were religious in nature. And the second one, he says that there is absolutely no evidence that UFOs are extraterrestrial or interplanetary in nature. All substances are, and quote unquote hardware alleged to have come from UFOs have been composed of earthly materials. And this is this is so interesting, because I don't see him disagreeing with Dr. Ross when I had him on the show, even though John Keel is not a man of faith. And I'm so thankful that we can, often find people so-called in the world, or secular people and secular sources, how many times they agree with the Bible. What is your, brief comment on these two quotations by John Keel?
Yeah. One of the things that I loved about Keel, as far as I know, he was never, like you said, a man of God. I'm not sure that he ever became a believer in his lifetime, and he passed away some years ago. So I pray that before the end of his life that he did, but I don't know that. But the thing that I've always found fascinating about Keel's work is he was always, even though he was not a believer per se, he was very honest, and he did his homework. And I think that he has insights that believers can glean from, that gives a lot of insight and explanatory power for a lot of this. Okay, now we're getting into the more weird stuff. It gives a lot of explanatory power for the weird stuff. One of the things that Keel talks about is, through the research that he did throughout his lifetime, he went back and he looked at all of the contactee literature, not just from this modern era, but going back centuries. And the thing that he found was, before our modern era, it was always framed in religious categories. It was always understood to be some sort of religious phenomena of some kind. And so, Keel thinks that it's foolish in some ways to just all of a sudden dump the religious framing of it, just because we're now moderns and like we think that we somehow know better. So I thought that was a fascinating quote, and that's one of the reasons why I included it in the book. I think that it proves, well, not that it proves, but I think that it's a piece of evidence that buttresses the argument that I'm making in the book, which is that what we understand today as UFO and UAP phenomena is something that's very old. It's something that's it's went back centuries. And primarily throughout history, it was, thought to be encounters with the gods or with celestial angelic beings. And you even see that in the Mothman prophecies. Like, if you read Mothman prophecies, one of the things that you see there in the book is not just are there sightings of Mothman, in Point Pleasant, but there are people who saw lights in the sky. And there are people who saw angels like coming down over parts of Point Pleasant and around Point Pleasant. Like, there were sightings of angelic beings there. And so, I think that it's something that's important. It's something that we need to consider. And I think that that it's not a way that this conversation is really being talked about right now. We think of it purely in materialistic ways. We think that they're little green men from outer space, from other planets. And primarily, whenever you look at the source material of the contactee literature, this was always a religious, it always had religious connotations prior to the modern era. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I also love when I had Dr. Ross, he gives a lot of he's not just research material, but also his experience. For example, when he went to the Soviet Union, and he, back in the days, a lot of scientists in Soviet Union were involved in the occult, and
Hmm.
but also he mentioned some parts of the states. I think he mentioned Hawaii and Alaska as being the two biggest states in the country when it comes to the number of people being involved in the occult. And then he makes this correlation how a number of, I mean, anyone can see anything, but he says how people have closer encounter with these entities, how usually these people would be involved in some sort of witchcraft or the occult. And he concludes something that John Keel also says, how these beings are interdimensional phenomena or beings. And
Yes.
what I love is how you mention in this section of your book, you go to the extra biblical sources and you mention First Enoch 8. And I want to read these three verses because they're very important. Why? Well, first, not just that they bring more context into what's happening in Genesis 6, but also I think that they're very important for us today. So again, this is First Enoch 8, verses 8 to 3. So I'll just read them. And
Mhm.
Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And these arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. I don't
Mm.
know how to pronounce these beings, Semjaza, something like that,
Yeah.
Semyaza, not sure, taught
Yep.
enchantments and root cuttings, Automatos, the resolving of enchantments, Baraquiel, again, not sure how to pronounce this, taught
Mhm.
astrology, Kokabel, the constellations, Ezekiel, but not Ezekiel prophet, the knowledge of the clouds, Erequel or Erequel, not sure again, the signs of the
Mm.
earth, Shamsiel, the signs of the sun, and Serial, the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. And just to give a context, all these weird names are understood to be the Watchers, the fallen ones who came
Yes.
and brought the secret knowledge to the people and corrupted them. So, Josh, I love this section of the book. How is this related with the UFOs and all these strange phenomena?
Well, you know, it's related in several ways. But I think that the main way is that one of the things that you always see whenever you look at contactee literature, um, is it's always this idea of advanced technology. You know what I mean? It's advanced technology, and then there's always the spiritual component to it, which Dr. Heiser talked about as well from his readings of in study of the contactee literature. There's always this message of enlightenment as well. Like there's various different kinds of message, and there seems to be just a repulsion to the name of Jesus in a lot of these people who have experienced this contactee stuff. So I think that this idea though of like extraterrestrials or UFOs and advanced technology, this is a theme that's present in the biblical text, and not just in the biblical text, but in the literature surrounding the Bible from the Second Temple period. This isn't something new. Like this is an idea that has been with us for a very, very long time. Like, and you just read it from First Enoch. Like these spiritual beings from the heavens who are lights, who are like stars. They're luminous like stars. It's the same description that we have of these types of beings today. In this day, they were bringing advanced knowledge and technology to people. Now, we don't think about swords and shields being advanced technology. Like that's Iron Age technology now, right? But to people living in that age, that was advanced technology. For people, the stars and stuff like that, watching the stars and astrology and all that, for us, that's woo woo, and all that. But for people in that day, that was advanced secret knowledge, especially for somebody who was divining information from the heavens to bring a message to someone, like in Babylon, right? The one of the things that you see there in Daniel is that the satrap at that time had, diviners who were divining astrological knowledge. All of this is connected. Like all of this stuff that we are experiencing in our day is goes back. It's very ancient, and to not see the theme there, I just think that we're missing something if we don't take note of it. I think that this is really good evidence that these beings that we're dealing with today, that we call UFOs or UAP or little green men or whatever you want to call them, they've been around for a very long time, and the message has always been the same.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think we can finish with this topic when by mentioning something which you call the concept of biologics. So my question to you, which is more of a rhetorical question, is: aren't angels traditionally considered to be purely spiritual beings? Because we see in Genesis chapters from 18 to 21, as well as the author of Hebrews in chapter 13, mentioning that angels can actually take the bodily form. So therefore, it's nothing shocking that the Son of God can do the same. But that's another topic.
Yes.
So what
Yes.
about the angels taking bodily form?
Yeah, and we hinted around on this a little bit earlier in our conversation, but we see in Scripture that angelic beings, these spirits, they're able to somehow take on embodiment. How exactly that works, the Bible doesn't say, but we see it, and some of the texts that you alluded there to, with the angels coming and meeting Abraham under the oaks of Mamre. We see that there, and we see it in other places that Daniel talks about, that he's with a spiritual being who has the form of a man. That was in Daniel 10. So so it does seem that even though angels are spirits, that they are able to find embodiment somehow. And we certainly see that with the demonic as well. They take on embodiment through possession and through ritualistic means and that kind of thing. But so yeah. But yeah, in one of the recent hearings that happened in Congress, though, with the biologics, there was a let me see here. Yeah. Oh, yes. So it was David Grush. He was a former intelligence officer representing 2 Pentagon task forces and that investigated UAPs. And he recently came out as a whistleblower. And under oath here in the past month or so, he actually imparted to the House Oversight Committee's National Security Subcommittee a staggering revelation, and that was that there has been an ongoing multiple-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, which, that's not something new. Like Bob Lazar was talking about this at the end of, like in '89. He was talking about working at I think it was S4. He was talking about that he worked there, and it was reverse engineering, alien craft. So that's not something new. The thing that's new here, though, is that this has been testified under oath now, and that's the new thing. But he said one of the things that he said, though, was, in addition, he conveyed that he had personally interacted with officials privy to craft with non-human origins that revealed that biologics had been retrieved by some of these vehicles. Now, he doesn't go into any kind of depth about what exactly he means by biologics. That he doesn't say if that's bodies. He doesn't say if that's something else. But in a lot of these unprecedented disclosures, a pivotal question emerges. How should we interpret that? Especially in light of the claims that I am making about these being spiritual beings. So Keel offered an interesting perspective, and you alluded to this earlier. You talked about this earlier. He said that there was no evidence that UFOs are extraterrestrial or interplanetary in nature. All the substances and hardware alleged to have come from UFOs have been composed of earthly material. And Dr. Heiser also said that as well. So Heiser noted that UFO descriptions evolve over time with technological change. He says That's one good reason to conclude that we aren't dealing with alien visitors. Think about it. If aliens were really visiting the planet during the last 100 years, would their craft really evolve from propeller-powered dirigibles to anti-gravity? Wouldn't they have had the latter already? So what are we to think about the non-human biologics? Well, in my view, I think that it's highly plausible that the retrieved crafts are crafts created by entities that are not of human origin. But I'm convinced there's reason to believe that the non-human biologics that have been obtained are, you know, that they there's a compelling case to be made that the non-human entities responsible for this are the sons of God, and perhaps it's one of these bodies that they've sought embodiment in, or there. This isn't the only kind of time that you see this kind of thing, like the idea that something that um, and a spirit is finding embodiment in can be destroyed. I don't think that the spirit can be destroyed, but the vessel in which it's taking on can be destroyed, if that makes sense. So, for example, you see this with haunted objects, with cursed objects. There are things, like idols, right? For example, in the ancient Near East, they used to do what was called the opening of the mouth ceremony, where a spirit would be embodied in an idol. The idol can be destroyed. It's a piece of wood, or it's something created with human hands. So the vessel can be destroyed, but that does not destroy the spirit. I would make the case, and it's speculative, but I would make the case that the same is true here, that whatever form they are taking on, whatever biologics that they have, is merely just another vessel or mask, and it can be destroyed, but it doesn't mean that the spirit is destroyed. So that's how I understand it.
Yeah, I think that whatever conclusion you came to perfectly aligns with Dr. Ross's and many other Christian researchers, that simply these entities are not from another planetary systems. They're from here, and they're the fallen ones. They're demonic in nature. Passage Ash, once when you mentioned 5 minutes ago about angels, but also demons having the ability to possess
Hmm.
form, visible form, material bodies. I didn't plan to ask you, but as well, while I'm listening to you, this question comes to my mind, and it's okay if you don't know the answer. But
Mhm.
still, when it comes to cryptids of all sorts, let's talk about either Dogman or I don't know, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, werewolves, and let's assume that these creatures exist.
Yes.
Okay, your theory, your understanding, at least to this point, which can change in in your
Mhm.
in your future, of
Mhm.
course. But so far, do you think that these monsters, these visible beings, that they learn that they're demonic beings, spirits behind these monsters who learn through witchcraft to somehow obtain bodies, or do you
Mhm.
think that they have possessed something, maybe an animal or some creature, and they have somehow came into this symbiosis of two beings, where it's demonic person and a sort of an animal? I know it's a vague and strange question, but I'm just curious for myself.
No, well, I mean, you do have tradition in some of the second temple literature of chimeric type beings. Whether that's the possession of an animal body, or strange relations with an animal to produce some kind of corrupted offspring. So that kind of thing is out there, like that is in the tradition. Let me say this: one of the interesting things that I have come across is there's this idea of subtle bodies. That these ideas, or that these types of beings have what's called subtle bodies. And so this is actually in the cryptids chapter that I've written. And I'll just be very brief with this. But let me find it here. It's a quote from a Scottish minister by the name of Robert Kirk. And so he wrote a book called The Secret Commonwealth of let's see here. I don't want to butcher it. It's called The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. And he was a folklorist, but he was also a Scottish minister between the years of, he lived back in the 1600s, but his name was Robert Kirk. And it's interesting because he talks about these types of beings back then, like in the 1600s, and he's a minister. But he talks about this bodies thing that we're talking about here. And so, people like Jonathan Pajot, who's, he has the symbolic world. He just released a video here recently on subtle bodies, and I watched it, but I was writing about this a little bit before I saw his video on it because Robert Kirk's talking about it. But so he says this, talking about these types of creatures. He says, these Siths or fairies, they are called Slay Math, or the good people. They are said to be of a middle nature between man and angel, as were daemons or demons, thought to be of old, of intelligent fluidous spirits, of light and changeable bodies, like those called astral, somewhat of the nature of condensed cloud and best seen in twilight. These bodies be so pliable through the subtlety of spirits that agitate them, that they can make them appear and disappear at pleasure. So Robert Kirk talked about the idea of, and this was somebody who, man, this was big. The idea of fairies was big in the Scots-Irish people. Like they had special holidays, blessings set aside for blessing stuff, so that the fairies wouldn't come out. And it's in the chapter. But this was a big part of their religious life. But the way that they looked at it was that they somehow possessed these subtle bodies that were able to be kind of made up of the elements in some ways, and that they were able to appear and then disappear. Yeah, I don't really have quite an answer to the question, but there are various possibilities out there. The idea of subtle bodies could be one. You've got the whole chimeric tradition out there as well. There could possibly be various answers to the question. So,
Thank you, Dad. Thank you for that. We came to the last section of the episode, and I know I'm being very subjective, but I think this is my favorite part. Pastor Josh, as you know, like about a month and a half ago, I had your dear friend Ward Heaney, and we talked for about 2 hours just based on his work on the Dark Holler, which I watched twice. And just like you said, I want to encourage all the viewers to go on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything. These episodes are available for free. Each of them is like 45 to 50 minutes long, only 5 episodes. I have to admit, and I'm not ashamed of this, after the second episode, things start getting creepy and scary. And I
yeah,
was watching most of these episodes late at night alone, and
yep.
I was upset with myself. But that's the time usually when I get off work and when I have time to do my homework for every episode. So I was like, man, why didn't I do this in the morning or daytime? But I watched all the episodes 2 times. I enjoyed, and I saw you numerous times being involved in this docuseries. For all of those who don't know, the plot is set. It's real story with with a lady called Christine and her family, and how she's coming from the demonic background, how she was possessed. She comes to Pastor Josh, who is about to baptize her. They come to the river, and Pastor Josh, can you please continue with this story and what happens onwards?
Yeah. So, we're down in the river, and I knew that Kristen had a background in the occult. I had been around her a time or two beforehand, and I had never spoken with her, but there was just a revulsion that she had towards me, and even towards her sister at that time, and her brother-in-law. And it was because they had been in our church and they had become Christians, and like she was just very, very distant. You could tell she wanted to keep her distance. But by the grace of God, through some conversations and through her experiencing some things during that time, she became open to hearing about Christ and the gospel. and her sister had been sharing the gospel with her, and her family had been sharing the gospel with her. And so she was open to coming and talking to me. And, in that moment, Kristen was still kind of, it was a very odd situation. Kristen, it's like you were talking to somebody who was there, but you could tell they weren't fully there that day. It was very, very strange. And so, I'm speaking with her and I'm talking to her about the gospel. I'm like, hey, do you believe this? That Christ lived the perfect life, that he died for your sins. He was resurrected from the grave on the third day. He's ascended to the right hand of God the Father, where he's enthroned as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he calls us to repent of our sins and to follow him, as King. And, she's like, yeah, I believe that. But again, you could tell she was very something was off. She was very in and out. And, but I'm like, hey, I have no reason to not baptize her. You know what I mean? Like she's professing faith in Christ. Whether or not it was that exact moment or not, I mean, perhaps it was the moment when the baptism was happening. I don't know. But so we long story short, we get down into the river, and I asked her. I said, hey, do you mind if I pray for you? Because I just knew that she had a history in the occult, witchcraft, all of those things. And she's like, yeah, that's fine. And so it was just the providence of God. Around that time, I had just really been doing a deep dive just into this topic of reenchantment. And, I ended up coming across an old baptismal liturgy that actually, it was actually Luther's baptismal liturgy and his baptismal rite. And, it's out there in a lot of high church traditions. It's a very common thing. For most of us low church Protestants, it's not common. And it's because we've casted off a lot of the liturgics that's been there in the historical church. But it's there. It was there. Luther, it was one of the, he didn't throw it away. It was something that he retained. And you can go out there, you can just type in Lutheran baptismal rites or Lutheran exorcism rites. And, it'll bring up, you can find that out there. And it's also out there in the Anglican tradition too, in the Book of Common Prayer. It's very, very common. So long story short, I recited Luther's exorcism baptismal rite while we were out there. And immediately whenever I did that, she started this like strange low grade like convulsion. And I'm not somebody I have never experienced anything like that before. I'm by no means experienced. I've never experienced anything like this since. And so this was a first for me. This kind of thing does not happen to me on a regular basis. So I was like, okay, a little strange, but I can roll with that. So, we turn, we face the crowd, and, I'm talking to the crowd, and I'm just like, hey, talking about Kristen, talking about her story a little bit from what I know about her. And, so we get to the point where we're about to baptize her, and I'm saying the Trinitarian formula, we baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son, and about that time, she begins to just drop backwards. And like, if you watch the baptismal video, you can see it. Like, we just kind of go with it. It's like, we baptize you in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, and we just go down with her. And we come back up, and like the reaction that we get, I've said this 100 times now, and still to this day, it's stuck in my head. I don't know if it'll ever come out. I've had a lot of reactions, over the years. Our church has grown from 7 people to 100 people. We've done a lot of baptisms over the years. I've seen a lot of reactions from people. I've seen a lot of people go down into the water and come out, and they're very stoic. There's not a lot of reaction. I've seen a lot of people come out and they celebrate and they're rejoicing. I've seen people get emotional, and they're crying because God has transformed their lives, and this is a show of that to the world. I have never experienced the reaction that we got out of Kristen, and that was that she come up out of the water, and there was a loud noise of like it was something like she was in pain, and there was like this retching noise that came out of her. and then it was like, and if you go back and you watch the video, like you can see the guy who was in the video with me, who was a man accompanying us doing the baptism, who was one of our pastors, other pastors. You can see him take a defensive posture. Like he's kind of like this, and he kind of backs up a little bit. It was very strange. And so she immediately puts her hands in her face and starts crying. So we help her over to the bank. And as soon as we take her to the bank, she sits down on the bank. And instead, at this point, people usually go and they're hugging family and they're celebrating and they're taking pictures and they're doing all that. She sits down on the bank and puts her hands over her head and just starts rocking back and forth like this. Never experienced anything like it to that moment. Never experienced anything like it to this day. And I thought all of this was very strange, obviously, but I felt like that. Hey, what I was asked to do, I done. So I said, congratulated her. Stuck around, talked with the family a little bit. Gave hugs, that kind of thing. And then, we headed to our car. And as soon as we sat down in the car, my wife, who's a very, very level-headed person, says to me, so when are we going to talk about this, that there was a demon come out of that girl? And I said to her, I thought that myself, but I'm just not quite sure what happened here, but it was very strange, and that was the first thought that came to my mind. And at this point too, I come from the more Reformed tradition, and at this point, I wasn't at this point I was the type of like cessationist, like to where I was like skeptical of the supernatural as a whole. And I think that's something that happens out there to people who end up as cessationists. It's like, and I'm not saying that it happens for everybody. There's a lot of people out there who are balanced and just say they think that the gifts of the Spirit, have ceased and they're not with us today, but they still have a view of the supernatural. I was not one of those people. I was the type of person to where any type of supernatural claims, I was just skeptical of those types of things. And here I had an event that I had experienced that it just blew my categories apart. It took me a long time to grapple with that. But anyway, to continue the story here. So I go home, this was later in the evening. I arrived here, like, I can't even remember what time it was now. This was back, I think, in 2020. Some of the memories are starting to fade, some of the details, but it was like 7:00 that night. I thought somewhere around that time, 6 or 7. So, I went home and we're kind of settling down for the night. And I start to get calls from people who were there at the baptism. One of them was from a girl who was there. She's a member at our church. She's actually on our worship team. And she says, hey, I'm not trying to be rude by asking this. I'm just trying to process what I saw. She was like, do you think that there was a demon came out of her in that baptism? Because I have never seen anything like that in my life. And I said, you're the second person to ask me that now. And that was the thought that went through my head, but I'm not quite sure, but it was definitely strange. So, I get another call, and it's from her sister and her brother-in-law. And her sister was so startled by what happened. So she had her phone up, videotaping it on the bank of the river. And whenever she come up and made the noise, she dropped the phone on the riverbank. This is her sister, by the way. If anybody knows you, it's your sister. If anybody knows what's normal behavior for you, it's your sister. This was not normal behavior for her. So they asked me, Josh, what happened? And again, I don't know. I have suspicions that I know what happened. I'm not sure what happened, but here's what I'm thinking. And here's what I do know. I do know that I said an exorcism prayer before that, and this is what happened as a result. I don't know if that's what happened, but it could be a possibility. And then I get a call from the other guy who helped me, baptize her. And that was about midnight that night. And he said, man, I've been thinking about this. And I thought there for a minute that maybe there was a demon came out of her. And I was like, you're like the fourth person who's called me and said the same thing today. And the thing that was interesting about it, though, was these were all people who witnessed the same event. And I, this was not conversations that was had, the families around, and you're absolutely not going to have this kind of conversation, with family who's around, and they're there to celebrate this change that's happened in this girl. She's trusted in Christ and she's been baptized. It's just not an appropriate place to have that kind of conversation. But they've all witnessed the same event and they're all drawing the same conclusion about it. So about a week or so goes by. I can't remember the exact time frame now, but I end up getting a call from Kristen, and she ends up confirming. I was like, "Hey, Kristen, I'm glad you called me. Like, there's just a couple things I want to ask you. There's a few things here that just doesn't quite make sense to me, and maybe you could just shed some light on them. Number one, why did you just go down into the river?" With just by just before we ever got to, the end of the Trinitarian formula, and what was just going on, after that? I'm just curious. And she says to me, well, I have vague memories of it. I don't have a full memory of it, but it was as though something was shoving me down into the river. I thought that whatever it was going to drown me. And whenever I came back up, whatever it was gone. She's like, I think that there was an exorcism that happened. And this is her telling me this. I'm not insinuating this is what happened. I'm not priming the pump to tell her that I think this is what happened in your baptism. This is what she tells me. And at this point, I have no choice but to conclude that this is what's happened. There are various witnesses to this account who saw it happen. They all drew the same conclusion. The person who was baptized himself has told me, this is what I experienced. So at this point, I say, okay, that's what happened then. The Lord delivered her in her baptism. And this is basically the event that started me down the path of where I am today. Dr. Heiser gave me some of the categories several years beforehand, which led me down a path to looking further into these things. And then the experience in this baptism was the thing that really kind of opened the door for me looking further and investigating these kinds of things. And I've got a group of friends, I had a podcast for years called The Sword and Staff. And, Richie was a great help to me. He goes to our church and he's still a great help to me to this day. He was the one who really introduced me to more of the paranormal side of things because, he was a paranormal investigator for years. He was a pagan before he became a Christian. And so Richie just had a lot of background in this stuff. And, to not give them credit would be unfair. They really helped me process a lot of this stuff. And honestly, this book has kind of come out as a result of that. It's a lot of what we talked about with Sword and Staff throughout the years, just put down into book form. So that's the story. That's the main driving theme of, that's what happens in episode 1 of Dark Holler. And the rest of Dark Holler is an exploration of why things worked out the way that they did. Why did this girl end up possessed? And what was she possessed by? Does God pull back the veil enough to give you that kind of insight to gather those details? We think that Dark Holler was that. We think that God just in that project allowed the veil to be pulled back just enough for us to be able to put together and to piece together enough dots to where we were able to make a case of this is what was going on. this is who she came in contact with, and we think this is what was going on. So, and that connects to the Lilith stuff.
Yeah, can we please finish for tonight with just this question? The sound that comes out from her, which you guys didn't register at the beginning, but then you found the footage and you isolated the sound and you played it. It's so creepy. Can we please just in a minute or two or three, just connect that demonic voice that leaves her the moment she's baptized with the later investigation that comes after the second episode with the Mothman and the screeching owl and all these demonic things, like you will be on the phone talking about Lilith or the Mothman and the screeching sound, and in front of your house or in the back of your house you would hear this demonic entity and voice being there trying to scare you and then disappearing. For me, this was like one of the scariest stuff in the whole docu-series. Can we please just talk very briefly about that connection with her voice and then the Mothman territorial spirit over your region?
Yeah, so there was a lot of strange things that happened in that period of time. There was a lot of strange things that did not make the cutting room floor even. And Ward can tell you some more about those things. But yeah, one of the weird things about that was we had experienced a voice coming out of Kristen whenever she come up from her baptism. And I told you it was like a screech. It was a very odd noise that goes into this weird retching noise. And the interesting thing about it, though, is when Ward got the video footage to that event, there's not, so he captures Kristen in the event, like it's captured in the video. It's somebody who was, on the bank recording it. And but the thing about it is even before she was baptized and went down in the water, Ward was looking at the audio files to it, and there's a lot of weird EVPs on it, like a lot of strange, like animalistic type noises on it. And the thing about it is this place, like, the audio was put out there to various people. Hey, is there any known animal in the area that makes this kind of noise? And there's not. The conclusion was drawn is it's a foreign noise that we don't quite know what it is. It sounds like an animal of some sort, but there's no known animal there that makes that noise. And another thing that's weird about it too was that the location of this is right in the middle of town. Like, there's a busy roadway. Like, this was at a park. Like, there are people at this park, and there's no discernible source from it. It's not like that there would just be a wild animal out here at this park in the middle. You're going to have to cross a busy roadway, and there's businesses over here, and there's the whole downtown area over here. It's just so unlikely. But to connect that back, there's various types of things, with that noise. One of the things that Kristen's mother said was she had heard that kind of noise before. She had heard it in Kristen before she was baptized. And then she had, family who also practiced witchcraft. So this seemed like real, like generational, a generational kind of thing. I don't know if you just saw that, but my power flickered. I should come to expect that at this point. That was interesting. So anyway, it's not even raining here. Like, that's the strange thing. Like, it's not even raining here. Well, that's my life now since this thing. But anyway, yeah. So she had heard this noise before. This kind of thing. Was also her mother's. I think it was her cousin or brother. I can't remember now. The details are fuzzy. This kind of thing had happened with him too, and the way that she described it was a quote unquote failed exorcism. They had tried to get a minister to do an exorcism on him, and it just did not work. And this kind of thing was there as well. The interesting thing, though, to connect some of this other stuff, though, is that a lot of the things that this family experienced, it has a lot of weird connections to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the Mothman case. Like the same type of phenomenon that they experienced was something that popped up and was present in Point Pleasant. Like, so they would just, like, apparently there's a story of Kristen, like a big giant owl swooping down and just sitting on the ground, and Kristen's able to walk over and just pet it. Like, that's strange. And then not just that, but just stories of huge, vultures and birds of prey and those types of things. So there's that kind of thing there too. But the interesting thing about it is that Kristen was practicing witchcraft, and one of the things that she was doing was she was worshiping a known spiritual being that we've talked about here named Lilith. And she had that like Lilith symbolism tattooed on her arm. And it's just mind-blowing types of connections there. So basically the conclusion that we drew is that she was involved in principality worship. And the interesting thing about Lilith is we tend to think of, one of the questions that somebody asked was, well, how does Lilith end up in West Virginia? Well, the thing is whenever you look at the ancient literature, it's actually Lilith or Lilitu or Lilith is actually a type of being. And this DDD mentions this. So for those who want more information, you can check out the entry in DDD, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons. It's actually a type of being. It's not just, it's a category of being. It's not just a singular being, but there are various types of beings like this out there. And, the interesting thing is they're typically depicted as this archetypal, like crone, like this old, like haggy woman, there's similar stuff in like some of the, European folklore, like with Baba Yaga. And, that kind of stuff, like this old crone woman who steals children, kills children in their sleep, that kind of thing. And the interesting thing is that Kristen was directly worshiping this being, like she was paying homage to and giving worship to Lilith. And so, or let's just say it this way, to a Lilitu. Or to a Lilith. And so, she had maiden mother crone symbolism, in the form of the waxing moon, the full moon, and then the waning moon tattooed on her arm, which is also, this archetypal being has all sorts of manifestations out in the ancient world. It's got that in, Northern European stuff. And then it's got it in, the Greek pantheon with beings like Hecate. And, it's an archetypal kind of thing that you can find in various types of cultures. And you should expect that, especially since all of these, ancient Near Eastern Greco-Roman religions are corruptions of, the biblical story. You see that with like the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's a corruption of the Noah story. So you should find elements of that out there, but that's what's going on with it. It's, if you want the full details of how that story, works itself out, go check out Dark Holler. It's for free on YouTube, and it's a wild ride. So,
yeah, thank you for that. I just have the last question from the audience. It's a very quick one. Sean is asking, could this entity or the bird be a thunderbird?
Yeah, so that's one of the connections that gets drew in Dark Holler is okay. I'll throw this out there to you. Interesting thing. So we're in the Logan County, Boone County area. For those of you who don't know, you can just go check it out on a map. But there was a huge Native American presence here. Interesting thing, Logan, West Virginia, which is 12 minutes from me this direction. Madison's 12 minutes from me this direction. Logan's 12 minutes from me this direction. Logan, West Virginia was originally named Aracoma. And that's because there was a Native American princess who was buried there. She's actually got a monument, a tomb, at the Logan County Courthouse named Princess Aracoma. Now, the interesting thing about Princess Aracoma is she was the daughter of Chief Cornstalk. Chief Cornstalk is buried in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Whenever they done excavations of downtown Logan, there was this hotel called the Aracoma Hotel. It was torn down. It actually burnt down, and then they tore it down. One of the things that they discovered there was basically a burial mound underneath the building. One of the things that they found there was a child with a quote-unquote Birdman motif emblem on I think it was either a gorget necklace or an anklet. So you have this group of Native Americans here paying homage to a great Thunderbird, or to the Thunderbird, or to the way that it's called the Birdman. Whenever Mothman was originally sighted, he wasn't called the Mothman. He was called the Birdman. And then he later on became known as the Mothman. So it does seem as though that there is this bird motif that runs throughout Dark Holler. And we know that there was principality worship in Logan and in Point Pleasant of the same being, of this Thunderbird, who's up in the heavens, and he's at eternal war with the water panther who's down below in the waters beneath the earth, who has a tail like a serpent that goes around and around. Interesting stuff. But yeah, I think that there's 100% a connection there. I definitely believe that there's a connection there. So I think that's what Mothman is.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Pastor Josh. Before we finish with tonight's episode, I just want to ask you, what are your concluding thoughts? Is there any new project, supernatural project that you're working on? And if you can give us the name of your either website or a blog or something where people can find you.
Sure. So yeah, there's some projects coming. There's a project that's been out there that's been in the works for a while. That's a kind of follow up to Dark Holler called Shadow Appalachia. And it's really exploring this motif at a larger level. I can tell you this. We rediscovered an ancient serpent mound in Logan County that is inaccessible for most, that dates back to 500 BC. That's in the first episode of Shadow Appalachia. And it plays into all of this stuff. So that's being worked on as we speak. And some of the plans for that are, continuing, to progress. Let's say it that way. There's trailers out there for it on YouTube. I'm not the person who's really in the driver's seat for that project as much as I was at Dark Holler. Really, Richie is the person who is in. Richie and Ward are really the ones who are, the ones kind of driving that on. But I am involved with it at different levels, but not quite the way that I was with Dark Holler. But I can say this: we do have a project coming up, I think, this week, where we're going to get together and discuss a film that was called The Unbinding, that just come out by Planet Weird, and it's a story about this cursed object, where this Slavic goddess named Mokosh from Russia, Ukraine, that area, was bound to an object, and the whole film is about the unbinding of this deity from this cursed object into the Catskill Mountains of New York. It's wild. It's put up by Planet Weird. You can watch it. It's on Amazon, on Prime. You can watch it on YouTube as well. I don't think that it's free, but it's put out by the people who put out a series called Hellier. But it's creepy. It's for sure creepy. So definitely watch it in the daytime. But it's interesting though, because it's what I've been talking about, what we've been talking about for a long time, which is that re-enchantment is inevitable. It's going to happen. The question is will we be enchanted by the very words of God, or will we fall for the dark enchantment? And will we be re-enchanted by the old gods and the return of neo-paganism that seems to be afoot right now? And I think that this is evidence like 5,000 for what I've been talking about for a while on that. So I think we're going to have a special reunion edition of Sword and Staff. We're going to get our gang together, and I think we're gonna talk about that a little bit. So that's coming up. There's some Shadow Appalachia stuff coming up. But if you want to keep track with me, where I'm the most active, I do have some activity going on with those projects. Probably not as much as other people do. But I do have another podcast up right now. It's called The Narnian. So very in the thought of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's really focused on the topic of Christian re-enchantment. And I actually just done an episode there this past week on the celestial hierarchy, kind of walking through some of the material of my new book. So you can find that there. You can find that on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. It's called The Narnian. And there's a few episodes up on there. There's a few essays that I've written on my Substack on there. That's the best place to find me, is on my Substack. So it's joshrobinson.substack.com. My publication is called The Narnian. And I write there every week, sometimes multiple times per week. I put out a lot of content there. So you can keep up with my writings as well. So my first book that I released, this is one of the review copies that I've got. I don't have one of the actual copies on hand. This is the first book that I released. I released it this year. It's called Re-Enchanting Time, a primer on how Christ's lordship changes timekeeping. And it's just a simple primer. It's about 80 pages on sacred timekeeping and how the lordship of Christ changes the way that we change time. And so I started up a publishing house called Haven Press, in-house publishing house, where we publish stuff. We've got some commentaries coming out too. We just preached through the book of James, and all of the sermons we preach from that's going to get turned into a pastoral commentary. So we're going to release some pastoral commentaries, basically the sermons we preached in our church. And then I'm using it to release my projects that I'm working on. So Re-Enchanting Time was put out through Haven Press. Re-Enchanting the Unseen is coming out. Originally, I was going to release it August of next year. I've almost got it edited now. I've got it finished written. It's written now. It's complete. I'm in the process of editing now. I'm hoping to have it out by Halloween. So no promises. Halloween at the soonest, end of the year towards Christmas at the latest. So you'll either be able to pick it up for Halloween or as a Christmas gift. So, but that's where you can keep up with me. I'm also on social media. The Narnians on Instagram, Substack. You can add me as a friend on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. So that's where you can find me.
Just before I say goodbye for tonight, I just want to say that Mokosh and many other gods and goddesses, when it comes to the Slavic pantheon, are also shared by my people, because we belong in one of the groups of the huge Slavic groups. So Mokosh is very well known, even in my people. I mean, among my people. And I'm not just a Bible and theology nerd. I also love the work of fiction and fantasy.
Yeah.
And I didn't plan to say this, but I was thinking, why not? Because it's in the context. Since a lot of my people, Serbian fantasy authors, write about these gods and goddesses in a positive term, how they're helping our people, they're joining our people, to wage war against the forces of darkness, demons, and the devil. But I see them as the pathway, how the old gods and goddesses are just coming, masquerading as someone good and trying to hypnotize, in a way, my people, because there is this movement of neo-paganism coming in the whole Europe, slowly but surely.
Yeah.
And my goal is, I started writing a couple of years ago this theology fictional novel, which is basically portraying these gods and goddesses as who they are.
Mm,
And in my novel, Christ is coming and he'll conquer all of them. So my big passion besides this channel is also finishing, this novel one day, but also continuing writing, because I see there's a lot of lack when it comes to the Eastern
mhm,
European and European in general fantasy authors who are so prone to so-called flirt with all these demonic entities, gods and goddesses. But when it comes to Christ or God of the Bible, he's always despised. He doesn't either exist
mhm.
or he's a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
So my goal is to fill those gaps by publishing book, even if it's not read much, even if it's read but mocked by a lot of critics or the audience. I want to try to start filling the gaps when it comes to the Christian authorship in the fantasy genre in
Mm,
Europe. So it's interesting how you mentioned Mokush, because she's one of many of those who, she is like a goddess of this realm, then you have God of this realm, then you have the
mhm.
supreme God. But I just want to show how Jesus is above all of this. But basically, yeah, Pastor Josh, it's been a blast. This week is, as far as I remember, our 6 month anniversary of the channel. I
Congratulations.
thank you, and I want to thank all of my guests so far, all of the people who have helped me run this channel, and I also want to thank you for having these 2 hours and 20 minutes that you sacrifice from your work, from your rest, from your family. And I also want to say that I couldn't imagine spending 6 month anniversary in a better way than having someone like you talking about topics where I feel so passionate about, and just trying to understand how all these entities, how all these topics, how all this celestial, if I can say division is working, so that we can at least learn more about the Bible and learn more about this beautiful universe,
Yeah.
mysterious universe, the way God designed it, and what is our role. And the
Mm,
way I'm trying to understand my role is like, hey, besides this novel and trying to fill those gaps, why not having a channel where we can discuss about this mysterious stuff? They're not very often discussed in churches or academia, because they're either too vague, or they may seem like, oh, if I talk about these things, people may laugh at me, especially if you're a theologian. Some of these things are like, it's a big no-no. So whenever I can have someone like you that can help me understand more, and also my audience, I'm very grateful. So,
mm.
brother, it's been a blast. I enjoyed every minute. I'm hoping to, some future episodes where we will continue talking about these things, and where we can keep enjoying your material and assessing those things, whether it be documentaries or books. It doesn't matter. I would just invite anyone, because I did provide your Amazon link also to your
Mm.
work. I would just invite everyone to support Pastor Josh and his books, so that will encourage him and help him also financially to continue writing, because he's doing a phenomenal job, not only as a pastor but also as a theology and supernatural researcher, and we can all benefit from his work. Pastor Josh, thank you once again. I wish you a blessed evening and blessed week. Thank you for everything, and God bless you.
God bless you too, and the pleasure's all mine. Thank you.